The first time I noticed him, I was sweating through my jersey on Rue du Marteau, and I didn't notice him at all. That's the part I keep getting stuck on. I want to say I felt something. The way people say it afterward, a shiver, a wrongness, the small animal under the ribs going still. But I felt nothing. I handed him the package. He signed. I clipped the tablet back to my hip strap, and I was halfway to Sharebeak before the next ping came in. His signature on that drop, when I looked at it later, said Peter Van Dale. The address was a third-floor apartment above a bakery that hadn't sold bread in 2 years and was now a place that sold green juices in glass bottles. He'd come down to the street to meet me because the buzzer was broken. He was maybe 60, soft around the middle, break time 05s, wearing a gray cardigan that had been washed too many times. He had thanked me in French and then again in Dutch, the way older Bruxellois do, like covering both bases is a small daily courtesy. I'd said "Grag Gadan" and pushed off the curb. I want you to understand that I had no reason to remember him. I do between 40 and 60 drops a shift. The job is exactly what it sounds like. A backpack, a bike, a tablet, a city. The company is called ClickBox, and it pays slightly better than the apps because we carry the small expensive things, the things that need a face. Legal documents, a watch being returned to a jeweler, a bottle of wine for a dinner the recipient is already late for. We see people for 90 seconds at their doors. We hand them the thing, they sign on the screen, with a fingertip we go. Break time 05s. The reason I remember Peter Van Dale now is because of what happened 3 days later in Excels. I was at the bottom of a narrow staircase on Rue Malibran, holding a flat package roughly the size of a hardcover book, and the man who came down the stairs to take it was him, the same man. The same soft middle, the same washed-out cardigan, the same way of holding a hand out for the tablet like he was apologizing for taking up my time. He thanked me in French and then in Dutch. I would not have noticed even then, I don't think, except that the tablet showed me the name on the package as I held it out for the signature, and the name was Henri Bosmans, and the address was not the address where Peter Van Dale lived. And the man who took it from me did not give any indication that he was being called by the wrong name. He signed H. Break time 5's Bosmans in the little box on the screen. He thanked me. He went back up the stairs. I clipped the tablet back to my hip. I made it 3 blocks before I stopped at a red light and stood there with 1 foot down on the cobblestones thinking about it. The light went green. The light went red. The light went green again. A tram passed behind me. I was thinking, it's the same man. Not even with alarm. Just the way you think that's the same song twice this hour on the radio. I checked the tablet. ClickBox lets you scroll back through your drops for the current shift, but only for the current shift. The earlier delivery was 3 days ago, gone from the device, sitting on a server somewhere. But I remembered his name, Peter Van Dale. I remembered because of the bakery, the juices, the cardigan. Break time 5s. I remembered the way he'd thanked me in both languages. I told myself it was a coincidence. I told myself older men in cardigans look alike. I told myself I was tired, that I'd done a double on Tuesday, that I was misremembering the first man's face because I'd seen the second one and overwritten the memory. All of this is what I told myself standing at that light in Excels, and I want to be honest that none of it had the shape of fear yet. It had the shape of a small puzzle I was choosing not to solve because solving it would take longer than the next ping would allow. The next ping came. I rode to it. The thing about doing this job is that your body learns the city before your head does. After the first month, I stopped reading street signs. A break time 05s. My legs knew the gradient of the climb up to Place Flagy and the way the cobbles got bad just before the Sablon. My hands knew the weight of a bottle of wine versus the weight of a hardback book in a padded envelope versus the weight of a piece of jewelry in a ClickBox branded box. My eyes learned to find the doorbell on a facade without scanning for it. They just went, the way your eyes go to a familiar face in a crowd. This matters because of what started happening in the week after Excels. I would arrive at a door. I would lift my hand to the buzzer. And before I pressed it, something in my chest would do a small flat thing, like a held breath I hadn't decided to hold. Then the door would open, and it would be him. Not always, maybe 1 drop in 5. But always him in St. Gilles. He was younger, maybe 40, lean, break time 05s in a denim jacket with a beard that was just starting to gray. The name on the package was Marc Lefebvre. He took the package and signed M. Lefebvre and thanked me in French only this time, and his French was the soft, drawn-out Brussels French, the one with the slight singing in it, and I rode away before I understood that I had been holding my breath the whole time the door was open. In Anderlecht, he was older again, maybe 70, in a wool coat that smelled faintly of cigarettes. The name was Joseph Mays. He thanked me in Dutch and in French. In Etterbeek, he was a woman. I keep wanting not to write that down because it sounds like I'm making the story bigger than it is. But she opened the door and my chest did the flat thing, and I knew, the way you know a song from the first note, Break Time 05s, and her name on the package was Anne Dubois, and she signed A. Dubois and thanked me in French and in Dutch. And her voice was different, but her thanking was the same two-step, the same small courtesy of covering both languages. I want to be careful here because I know how this reads. I am not telling you I saw the same face on different bodies. I am telling you that something underneath the faces was the same, and that my body had started recognizing it before my eyes caught up. I tried to test it. The next drop I had after Etterbeek was in Forest, an apartment block on Avenue Van Valksem, and when I rode up to it, I made myself look at every detail of the building before I rang the buzzer. The color of the door, the graffiti on the panel beside it, which read Nico 4 in faded blue marker, the bent mailbox flap. Break Time 05s. I made myself describe the building out loud, under my breath, before I pressed the buzzer, so that I would know I had been here and not somewhere else. The man who came down was in his 50s, balding, in a Brussels sport tracksuit. The package was for Thomas Verheyden. He signed. He thanked me in French and in Dutch. I said in French, "Do you live here?" He looked at me with very mild surprise, the way people look when a courier asks anything beyond, "Do you want this here or in the lobby?" Then he said, "Yes." "Of course." I said, "For how long?" He said, 6 years next month. I said, "Thank you." And I clipped the tablet back to my hip and rode away. And at the corner I stopped and got off the bike and stood with my hands on my knees and breathed, because something inside me had finally caught up to my hands. I want to tell you what I did next. Break time all fives because I think it matters. I did nothing. I rode the rest of my shift. I did 11 more drops. I checked into the depot at 6:15, returned the tablet, racked the bike, walked 4 blocks to the tram, took the tram to my apartment in St. Josse, and ate a frozen pizza standing up at the kitchen counter while I watched a video on my phone of a woman in Japan making bread. I did not call anyone. I did not write anything down. I did not tell my flatmate Adele when she came home from her shift at the museum and asked me how my day was. I said it was fine. I said the chain on my bike was making a noise. She said I should get it looked at. I lay in bed that night and I tried to remember every drop where it had been him and every drop where it had not. Break time of fives, and the trying produced a kind of low hum behind my eyes that I recognized from the few times in my life I had been very afraid for a sustained period. The time my brother was in the hospital. The time I lived in an apartment where the gas had a small leak no one could find. The hum was familiar in a way that should have told me everything. I want to say I was scared. I think what I felt was closer to the feeling of being recognized. That's the part I can't make pretty for you. I had spent 6 weeks handing packages to a man I did not understand was the same man, and the not understanding had been comfortable in the way muscle memory is comfortable, and underneath the comfort, there was the slow accumulating fact that my body had learned him faster than my mind. Break time 05s, and my mind was now being asked to catch up to a relationship that was already established. I was not meeting a stranger. I had been meeting him for 6 weeks. The relationship existed. The only question was what shape it had. I slept badly. In the morning I went to work. Brussels in late October has a specific kind of light. It comes in at a low angle that makes the wet cobblestones look polished and turns every west-facing window into a small flat sun. The air smells like wet leaves and the burnt sugar smell from the waffle stands. The trams sound louder than they do in summer because the streets are emptier. I was riding through this light on the morning after Forest, climbing up the hill out of St. Catherine toward the upper town, and I was paying attention. I want you to know that I was paying attention. Break fives. I had decided overnight that I was going to. My third drop of the morning was on Rue de la Régence, near the Sablon, a tall, narrow townhouse with a polished brass plate beside the door that said something about a notary's office. The package was small and heavy, the way a box of coins is heavy. The name on it was Frederic Dujardin. I pressed the buzzer. I waited. The door opened. It was not him. The man who opened the door was in his 30s, in a thin gray suit, with a tie loosened at the collar and a slightly distracted expression like I had interrupted a phone call. He took the package without looking at me. He signed without looking at the screen. He said merci in the flat, distracted French of a man who already had 1 foot back inside his own day, and he closed the door. I stood on the step for a second longer than I should have. Break times 05s. I felt something I want to call disappointment, but it wasn't that. It was closer to the way you feel when a song you've been waiting to hear ends, and the next song on the playlist is one you don't know. A small dropping. a small empty. I rode to my next drop. It was him. It was him in Schaerbeek in a long apartment block on Avenue Louis Bertrand on the 4th floor. He was a man this time, maybe 45, in a flannel shirt, with the kind of beard that suggested he worked from home. The name on the package was Lucas Vermeulen. He signed L. Vermeulen, and he thanked me in French and in Dutch, and I stood in the doorway 1 second longer than the script of the job allowed, and I said, "In French, we've met before." He paused. He was holding the package against his chest, and his hand was just lifting away from the screen, break 05s, and he paused with his hand in the air between the screen and his body. And he looked at me with an expression I want very much to describe accurately and cannot. It was not surprise. It was not denial. It was something like the way a teacher looks at a student who has answered a question correctly but earlier than expected. A small recalibration. A small here already. Then he said in French, "I don't think so." He said it kindly. He said it the way you say no thank you to a tourist asking if you want to buy a rose at a restaurant. He said it, and he stepped back into the apartment and he closed the door. And I stood on the landing with my hand still half raised toward the tablet. And the hallway smelled like old wood and someone's coffee. And somewhere in the building a dog was barking, and I thought, break time 05s. He knew the answer to that question before I asked it. I rode away. I did not stop at the corner this time. I rode all the way to the next drop and the next one and the next one, because the hum behind my eyes had become loud enough that stopping would have meant having to listen to it. The thing I keep coming back to, the thing I want to put down as carefully as I can, is the question of what I had been training. I want to explain what I mean. This job, Clickbox, the bike, the tablet, the small daily ritual of handing things across thresholds, is a job where your body learns things your mind does not bother to. You learn the people who tip and the people who don't. You learn the buildings where the buzzer is broken. You learn the streets where it is safe to leave a bike unlocked for 45 seconds and the streets where it isn't. Break time 05s. You learn which receptionists in office lobbies will sign for a package addressed to someone else and which ones will make you wait while they call upstairs. You learn the rhythm of a city the way a piano player's hands learn a piece, without naming the notes, without thinking about them, just by doing the motion over and over until the motion lives inside the hands and not the head. What I am trying to say is this. For 6 weeks, my hands had been learning him. They had been learning his wait at the door, his pacing, his thanking, the rhythm of how he reached for the tablet. They had been learning him below the level of my conscious noticing, the way I had learned 100 other things below the level of my conscious noticing. He had been entering the same place in my muscle memory that the broken buzzer on Rue Malibran entered. Break time .05s, that the bent flap on the mailbox on Avenue Van Volksem entered. He had been becoming a feature of the city, and the city had been letting him. I rode through that afternoon thinking about how many times he had been there, and I had not seen him, because the not seeing was the point. The not seeing was the shape of what was being built. If I had seen him on day 1 and recognized him on day 2, I would have called the office and reported a strange pattern, and the pattern would have ended. Instead, the pattern had used my own routines against me. It had hidden inside the place where I was not paying attention because I had trained myself not to pay attention there. I do not think I am explaining this well. I will try again. When you do 40 drops a day, the 40 drops become 1 drop repeated. The differences flatten. Break time 05s, the faces become 1 face. This is not a failure of attention. It is a kindness the mind does for itself, because 40 separate strangers is too many strangers for one nervous system to hold. Your mind collapses them into a category, and you operate on the category, and the category gets you through the day. The horror, and I am calling it that now because I do not have a better word, is that something had been hiding inside the collapse. Something had figured out that the place where 40 faces become 1 face was a place you could live, if you needed to live somewhere that I would not be able to see you. That night I told Adele, I want to be honest about why. It was not because I trusted her, although I do trust her, and it was not because I thought she could help. Break time .05s, although she has a sensible practical mind and I have always been the more anxious one of us. It was because I was afraid that if I did not say the sentence out loud to another human being, the sentence would not exist. I was afraid that I would wake up in the morning and the whole shape of it would have softened into something I could explain away. And I would go back to work, and my hands would go back to learning him. And the relationship, that's the only word I have for it, would deepen 1 more day without my consent. So I sat on the edge of the bathtub while Adele was washing her face and I said, In French, because we always speak French at home, even though her first language is Flemish, I think the same person has been receiving my packages. She turned off the tap. She had soap on her chin. She said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Break time 05s. I mean a different name and a different face every time, but the same person." She looked at me in the mirror for a long second, with the soap on her chin, and then she rinsed her face and dried it with a towel and turned around and sat down on the floor of the bathroom with her back against the door, the way she does when a conversation is going to be longer than she expected. And she said, "Cammy, tell me everything." I told her. I told her about Peter Van Dale and the bakery. I told her about Excels. I told her about Anne Dubois in Etterbeek and the man in Forest who had said he had lived there 6 years. I told her about the man in Schaerbeek that morning saying, "I don't think so," the way you say no to a rose at a restaurant. I told her about the body recognizing him before the eyes did. Break time 05s. I told her about being afraid that the not seeing was the point. She listened the whole way through without interrupting. When I finished, she sat for a moment with her arms around her knees, and then she said, "Do you have a list?" I said, "Of what?" She said, "Of the addresses." "Do you have a list of every drop where this happened?" I did not. She said, "Make one." I made the list that night at the kitchen table, with the window open onto the courtyard, with Adele sitting across from me drinking a beer she didn't really want. I did not have access to my drops from ClickBox. The company holds those, and only the current shift is visible on the tablet, but I had my own memory, and I had the photos I take with my phone of the more expensive packages before I hand them over. Break time point 05s, which is a habit I picked up after a dispute with a customer in my first month. The photos had timestamps. The timestamps had locations. The locations were a list. I wrote down 12 addresses. 12 drops where I was sure. There were more I was unsure about. Drops that lived in a foggy place where I thought maybe but couldn't say with confidence. And I left those off because Adele's practical mind insisted on it. 12 confirmed. When I looked at the 12 addresses on a map I had pulled up on Adele's laptop, I saw that they were arranged in a circle, not a perfect circle, a rough one, a ring of dots around the inner city of Brussels, going from St. Catherine in the northwest, down through St. Gilles in the south, and back up through Etterbeek and Schaerbeek in the east, and Anderlecht in the southwest. Break time of 5s. The center of the ring was approximately the Grand Place. The ring's radius was approximately 3 kilometers. Adele and I looked at the map for a long time. She said, in French, "That could be a coincidence." I said, "It could." She said, "But you don't think so?" I said, "No." She said, "What's at the center?" I said, "The Grand Place. Tourists, waffles, nothing." She said, "What's at the center of you?" I want to tell you that I understood what she was asking. I didn't, at first. I sat there with the map glowing on the screen and the apartment quiet around us and the trams going by outside, and Adele let the question sit, and I thought about it, and slowly I understood. I said, "My route to work passes through the Grand Place." She said, "Every day." I said, "Every day." She said twice, "Going and coming." I said, "Yes." She closed the laptop. Break time 05s. She finished her beer. She said, "Cammy, you have to call the police." I said, "And tell them what?" I did not call the police. I want to be honest about that too. I did not call them because I could not assemble, in my head, the sentence I would say to them. A man is receiving packages from me under different names. And then they would say, "What does he look like?" And I would say different things. And they would say, "How do you know it's the same man?" And I would say, "Because my hands know him." And they would say, "Kindly, miss, have you been getting enough sleep?" And the worst of it was that they would not be wrong to ask. If I were sitting on the other side of that conversation, hearing my own story from someone else's mouth, I would ask the same question. The story is not the kind that survives daylight. Break time 05s. It is the kind that lives in the place between your shoulder blades, the place where the hum is. So I did not call the police. I did the thing I had been trained, by the rhythm of my own job, to do. I rode my shift. I rode my shift on a Thursday in late October, and the light was that low, polished light, and the air smelled like wet leaves, and the trams were loud. I had 34 drops on my sheet. I had eaten a banana and drunk a coffee and put on the rain jacket because the forecast said rain by 3. The first 8 drops were ordinary. I would like very much to tell you they were not, that I felt his presence threaded through them, that the city was different now that I was watching for him. But the truth is that the first 8 drops were the first 8 drops. And the city was the city, break time 5s. And I handed packages to 8 different people who were 8 different people, and none of them thanked me in 2 languages. The 9th drop was on Rue de Flandre, near the canal, a narrow apartment above a Moroccan grocery. The buzzer worked. The door opened. He was a woman, maybe 30, with very short hair dyed white in a paint-stained sweatshirt. The name on the package was Sophie Aerts. She signed S. Aerts. She thanked me in French and in Dutch. She closed the door. I stood on the step. I had been planning, all morning, what I would do when this happened, and the plan dissolved at the moment it became necessary. The plan had been to say something, to do something, to take a photograph, to ask a question that would force the pattern into the open. The plan had been to refuse somehow to participate. Break time 05s, what I actually did was clip the tablet back to my hip strap and walk back to my bike. I want to sit with that for a moment. I want you to sit with it. I had spent the entire night before deciding that I would not let this continue. I had drawn the map. I had told Adele. I had been afraid enough to be unable to sleep until almost 3 in the morning, and then I had ridden my shift and the pattern had presented itself again, and I had clipped the tablet back to my hip and walked back to my bike. Because the habit of clipping the tablet back to my hip and walking back to my bike was deeper in my body than the decision I had made the night before in the kitchen. This is what I mean when I say the not seeing was the point. The not seeing was the trained behavior. The trained behavior was deeper than my will. My will was the thing on top. Break time my hands were the thing underneath. I rode to the next drop. As I rode, I started to cry, a little, not in a dramatic way, just leaking, the way your eyes will when you ride into a cold wind, except that the wind was not cold, and the leaking was for a different reason. I rode through the leaking. I did the next drop. It was not him. I did the drop after that. It was not him. I did the drop after that, and the drop after that, and the drop after that, and none of them were him. And by the time I had done 5 drops in a row that were not him, I was sitting at a red light near the Bourse, and I understood, finally, that the morning's 9th drop had been a goodbye. He had presented himself one more time. In the white-haired woman, in the paint-stained sweatshirt, break time 05s, that I would carry the memory of her face out of that doorway and into the rest of my life. He had thanked me in French and in Dutch. He had let me look at him, and then he had let me leave. The pattern had completed. I sat at the red light and I cried properly for a moment, openly, in public, in the way you can sometimes get away with in Brussels because no one will stop to ask you why, and then I wiped my face with the back of my hand and I rode to the next drop. I have been trying to write the end of this for 2 weeks now, and I keep coming back to the same problem, which is that the end is not the kind of end that closes. I did not quit my job. I want to put that down because I think you deserve to know. I went back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, and I did my drops, break time 5s, and I learned the new patterns of the autumn rain. And I picked up a small repeat customer on Rue Antoine Danseriert who sends a bottle of wine to her son every Friday. And I memorized her buzzer, and my hands learned her door the way they learn every door, the way they had once learned his. He has not come back. Or I should say this more carefully, I have not seen him again. I do not know if those are the same sentence. I think about him every day, not constantly. The thinking is more like the way you think of a song you used to know all the words to, and now only know the chorus of, a thing that visits at odd hours, when I am chaining up the bike or waiting for the elevator in a building where the lobby smells right, where the light comes through the glass at a particular angle, break time 05s, where my chest does the small flat thing for a second before the door opens and it is not him. Adele thinks I should have stopped. She does not say this out loud anymore, but I see her watching me sometimes when I come home from work, watching me unclip the helmet, watching me peel the rain jacket off, watching me to see whether I am still the person who came home before I knew. I am, I think. I am also not. The hum behind my eyes is quieter than it was, but it has not gone away. I do not think it ever will. I have stopped expecting it to. Here is the thing I do not know how to say without sounding wrong. He used me to do something. I do not know what it was. The packages were real. I checked, a few of them, against the public address registries, and the names were sometimes real names attached to those addresses, and sometimes not. Break time equal 5s, and the ones that were not did not show up as anything obviously criminal when I searched, just absences, just blanks. He was not, as far as I can tell, smuggling anything obvious. He was not, as far as I can tell, hurting anyone obvious. What he was doing was passing through. He was using the small repeating moment of a courier handing a package across a threshold as a way of being inside the city without being inside it. He was using my hands as the place where his presence got authenticated. He was, in some way, I will never have the vocabulary to explain to a police officer or to my mother or to you, depending on the fact that the city had trained me not to see him, and I had not seen him. That is the part that does not close. The part where I have to keep being the person who, for 6 weeks, break time 05s, not handed things across thresholds to the same person under 12 different names and did not notice. The part where the not noticing was not a failure of my attention but a function of my attention, the thing my attention had been built to do. The part where, if it were to happen again, I cannot promise you, I cannot promise myself, that I would catch it sooner. My hands learned him. My hands could learn him again. My hands are still the same hands. I rode to the bakery on Rue du Marteau last week, the one with the green juices. It was a Saturday and I was not working. I stood across the street for maybe 20 minutes, drinking a coffee from a paper cup, watching the door. People went in and out. None of them were him. None of them were a soft older man in a wash cardigan, thanking the cashier in 2 languages. A break time equal 5s. The 3rd floor window above the bakery had a plant on the sill that I did not remember being there before. A small fern, the kind that needs more light than that window gets. I finished my coffee. I walked back to my bike. I rode home through the Grand Place, because that is the route my legs know. There is a particular intersection at the edge of the Grand Place where you have to stand with 1 foot down because the cobbles are uneven and the bike will not balance otherwise. And as I waited there for the light, my chest did the small flat thing, the held breath thing, and I looked up. The square was full of tourists. A woman in a red coat was taking a photograph of the Hotel de Ville. A child was eating a waffle with too much sugar on it, and a man, his father, break time Pinot 5s, presumably, was crouched down wiping sugar off the child's cheek with a napkin. A pair of older women were arguing in Italian about a map. The light went green. I did not see him, but I want to tell you that I felt him. Not in a way I can describe to you that will hold up to scrutiny. Not in a way that would survive a question from a police officer. In the way my hands had felt him for 6 weeks before my eyes ever did. The flat thing in the chest. The held breath I had not decided to hold. The small dropping. The small empty. I pushed off the curb. I rode home a week after that. On a Thursday I had a drop on Rue de la Loi near the European Quarter, in one of those blank office buildings that look the same from the inside as from the outside. The package was for a man named David Janssens. I rode the elevator to the 7th floor. Break time 05s. I walked down a corridor with gray carpet that absorbed the sound of my cleats. I rang the bell at suite 712. The door opened. It was a woman in her 50s, in a navy blazer, with a lanyard around her neck. She took the package. She signed D. Janssens. She thanked me in French, only French. Then she closed the door. I stood in the corridor. I waited for the flat thing in the chest. I waited for the held breath. I waited for the hum behind the eyes. None of it came. The corridor was quiet. The gray carpet absorbed everything. The fluorescent lights buzzed at the exact frequency they always buzz at. A printer somewhere on the floor was running. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. The elevator came. I rode down to the lobby. I unlocked my bike. I rode to the next drop. I do not know what to do with that one. Break time 05s. I think about it more than the others. I think about her signing his name without thanking me twice. I think about the navy blazer in the lanyard. I think about how clean the corridor was. I think about how my body did not recognize her, and how that not recognizing was the loudest thing that had happened to me in a month. I do not know if it was him, and my body has stopped knowing how to see him. I do not know if it was not him, and the pattern is over. I do not know if there is a difference between those two things. I do know that I went back to suite 712 on a Saturday when I was not working, when there was no package to deliver. I rode up in the elevator. I walked down the corridor with the gray carpet. I stood in front of the door of 712. There was no nameplate. Break time 05s. There was a small frosted glass panel above the door with no light behind it. I stood there for maybe 2 minutes, listening, and I heard nothing. No printer, no voices, no breath. I lifted my hand to knock. I did not knock. I lowered my hand. I walked back down the corridor. I rode the elevator back to the lobby. I unlocked my bike. I rode home through the Grand Place because that is the route my legs know. And as I waited at the intersection with the uneven cobbles, my chest did the flat thing. And I looked up, and the square was full of people I did not know. And I did not see him, but I felt him. And the thing I have not been able to say to Adele, the thing I have not been able to say to my mother on the phone, break time 05s, the thing I have not been able to put into the sentence I would say to a police officer if I ever called one, the thing I am only now putting down here, because here is the only place it will fit, is that I do not know, anymore, whether the feeling means he is there, or whether it means I have learned to feel him whether he is there or not, or whether those are the same thing. Last Tuesday I had a drop in St. Gilles in an apartment above a Portuguese cafe, and the man who opened the door was just a man, in his 60s, in a sweater. And he took the package and he signed and he thanked me in French and in Dutch. And the flat thing did not happen in my chest, and the held breath did not happen. And the hum behind my eyes did not happen, and I rode away. Break time 05s. And 3 blocks later, I stopped at a red light, and I stood there with one foot down on the cobblestones, and I realized I could not remember the man's face. I tried to picture him. I had seen him 90 seconds before. He had stood close enough to me that I could smell his coffee. He had thanked me in 2 languages, and I could not picture him. I could picture the sweater. I could picture the doorway. I could picture my own hand holding the tablet out for him to sign. The space where his face should have been was not blank. It was full. The way the sky is full of light even when there is nothing in it. But the fullness did not resolve into features. The light went green. I rode to the next drop. I did not stop crying for the rest of the shift, quietly, the way you do when the wind is cold, except that the wind was not cold. Break time equal 5s. I am still doing the job. I am writing this in the apartment, at the kitchen table, on a Sunday, with Adele asleep in the next room and the rain on the window and a cup of tea going cold beside the laptop. I have a shift in the morning. I have 36 drops on my sheet. My helmet is by the door. My rain jacket is on the hook. The tablet is charging. I do not know who I will hand things to tomorrow. I do not know if I will recognize them. I do not know if my hands will. I do not know which of those two is worse. I do know that I will clip the tablet back to my hip after each drop, and I will get back on the bike, and I will ride to the next address, because that is what my body has learned to do. The learning is the deepest thing in me now. It is deeper than the fear. It is deeper than the wanting to stop. It is deeper than the part of me that knows, somewhere underneath the hum, that the relationship has not ended, that it has only stopped, the way a song stops, the way a held breath stops, and that something is waiting on the other side of the stop for me to start it up again. And that I will, tomorrow morning, the moment I lift my hand to the first buzzer of the day. The rain is heavier now. Adele just turned over in her sleep. The tea is fully cold. I am going to bed. I will see you tomorrow, or I will see someone tomorrow. I no longer know if those are different sentences.